Imagine you're making coffee or answering an email or tying your shoes, and then a volcano erupts, an earthquake hits, a fire sweeps through, something sudden, something final. Your life stops mid gesture. Centuries later, strangers arrive. They don't know your name. They don't know your jokes. They don't know who you loved. They only know what you left behind, your objects, your artifacts. This is how we know Pompeii, not through voices, but through things. And that's how I met George. In our last episode of I'm Curious About George, I introduced you to a strange house on a hill filled with the entire contents of another person's life. The bookshelves stacked with volumes on the occult, psychic phenomena, magic, religion, and stranger things still. I shared my lifelong attraction to buildings that hold lingering histories, from the Huron substation in Los Angeles to the very first home I purchased, which happened to have housed a gay porn film production company. And I introduced you to the conundrum I call Falcon Man, an image, a guide, a messenger that appeared in my meditations the moment I encountered the property. Was Falcon Man guiding me to land on this land, or was he guiding me to something else? Before I go further, I want to say this clearly. The man whose life I am excavating, George, is not his full name, and it never will be. That's intentional because archaeology isn't about exposure, it's about witnessing. George didn't consent to be known by strangers, but he deserves to be remembered with care, with dignity, with some privacy intact. So I offer you fragments, not a spectacle. Sometimes the past taps you on the shoulder, sometimes it grabs you by the hand, and sometimes it sends a messenger. My name is Micah Kopp, and this is episode 2 of I'm Curious About George. As a child, I dreamed of becoming an archaeologist. I imagined myself in far-off lands, sporting dusty boots and my favorite color, khaki, scanning the ground for faint rises in the earth, tiny shadows hinting at something greater underneath. The past felt like a puzzle the future left behind. And I loved the idea that a single object, a tool, a stone, a charm, could crack open the veil between the earthly and the divine. When I arrived in George's house, that childhood dream snapped awake. This place wasn't just full, it was crowded with meaning. I continued on with that child archaeologist mindset. Follow the crumbs, dig deeper, and listen. My first night here felt strange. I no longer had my bed. I had gifted it to my son. During COVID and after selling the Huron substation, I'd bought a mattress and kept it on the floor of my friend's garage gym, which became my temporary shelter, my dinghy after leaving the mothership, as I was adrift without a compass. So in George's house, I dragged his mattress off the frame and put my new Goldilocks approved mattress on top of his giant bed. There I slept, surrounded by George's dark, heavy furniture, along with just a few boxes of my own. By the bed stood a carved wooden lamp of an old man reading a book. Not cute or decorative, it was more lifelike, like it was watching me and fit in with all the books in the house. That night, after midnight, I woke up smelling cigarette smoke. No one was here, no windows open, just the smell of someone who lingered in the air. In daylight, I explored. I opened drawers, cabinets, and closets. I felt uncomfortably voyeuristic, but also responsible. If I didn't witness this life, everything would end up in a landfill. His legacy simply erased, like a data file deleted. And this is where Pompeii came rushing in, because when archaeologists open a house frozen in time, they don't find meaning, they infer it. George's artifacts included Deco-style candlesticks, cooking gadgets, a vintage oven, handmade architectural replicas, hundreds of matchbooks, 2 animal spirit oracle decks, and a lock of someone's hair placed in a tiny glass tube for safekeeping. The lock of hair, I felt it before I understood it. It radiated intimacy, loss, reverence. It's one of the breadcrumbs. What would you think if this was all you knew? Was he a ritualist, a homemaker, a designer, a widow, a man preparing for something sacred, or simply preparing dinner? Out of context, objects lie. They suggest stories, they invite projection. And then there was the lock of hair. The lock of hair kept nagging at me. Who was it? Why keep it? Then one day, reading George's obituary, I learned that his wife had died young from valley fever. Soon thereafter, high on a bookshelf, I found a book about valley fever. It had underlined passages, notes in the margins, as if George had been desperately trying to understand the illness that took someone he loved. It felt intimate in a way that almost felt intrusive, like I was trespassing in someone's grief. I set it aside, but something about it stayed with me. The breadcrumbs were no longer symbolic. They were becoming personal. This wasn't clutter. This was grief made material. And that's when the question turned back at me. If my life were frozen in time, what would strangers think of me? They'd find a lot of pottery, some in the shape of what I like to call dinosaur eggs, all made by my father. They'd find clothing with a theme of stripes. They'd find a carved Viking statue that I ironically found in the desert. And they would find numerous images of my son Anton and I, with an empty area where the father would normally stand in the picture. What would they say about me? Am I sentimental, playful, lonely, artistic? What would your artifacts say about you? Who would you become out of context? The first time a falcon appeared in my life was a week after my mother died. A seismic loss tangled with a complicated yet beautiful history. A falcon flew into the large historic building we lived in. It circled for days, trapped against transom windows screwed shut for decades. My son and I managed to unscrew a number of windows and pull them from their frames, trying to encourage the bird to fly out the windows. Eventually, our only prospect was to throw a bedsheet over the falcon, at which point we managed to pick it up and then release it into the cold December air. Before I go further, I want to acknowledge and recognize that this land is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Chumash people, the original stewards of this region. Their stories, language, and spirits shape this landscape. In Chumash culture, the hawk or falcon, Halek, is a messenger carrying prayers between the earth and the sky world. So when the falcon man came into my meditations, when I felt guided to purchase this place. It felt like a symbol within a symbol, a guide, a protector, a being that sees what others cannot. The breadcrumbs were everywhere, and let's hope those birds weren't eating the breadcrumbs. And here I am, surrounded by objects that I feel like messages, breadcrumbs scattered across time. Maybe Falcon Man isn't guiding me to something. Maybe he's asking me to look more carefully. There's something I need to mention. While sorting through the bookshelves, I came across a number of paperback novels, all with one word in common: falcon. Again and again, that same word. What matters to me isn't their content, it's their presence and their recurring symbol. This is where an object stops becoming just an object when repetition appears inside an archive, especially one assembled by a single person. It becomes a clue, or at least an invitation to pay attention. And here's the part where I have to turn the lens back on myself. I had already seen falcons in real life, in visions, and in moments tied to this land. So I have to ask, am I discovering a pattern or am I completing one? And the falcon, however accidental, however mundane, keeps showing up. There's something I want to discuss with you that I feel I can't ignore. It's the timing. This podcast is emerging at a moment when ideas that once lived on the fringe are walking into the center of the room. The world is changing quickly. While some of what I'm describing here might seem really out there, redefining the limits of consciousness is now being given the respect of real discovery, whether explored in Substacks, documentaries, and podcasts addressing the subject. Telepathy, once dismissed, is now being studied seriously in neuroscience labs. The emergence of the popular podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, where in season 1, they focus on the telepathic communication amongst nonverbal autistic children. While this is controversial, it's become largely accepted by the mainstream, with the New York Times including the podcast within the 41 things that stuck with us in 2025. And the concept of global consciousness that we can all tap into is a defining theme in both seasons of the Telepathy Tapes. How global consciousness might influence such physical systems as random number generators, they're called RNGs, is part of the study by the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University. For instance, the GCP researchers observed a significant spike in non-random number data from generators placed all over the globe that began several hours before the first plane hit the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. That was seen as a possible global precognition of that event. It peaked during the attacks and lasted for several days afterwards. This anomaly was one of the most statistically significant ever recorded by the project, leading some researchers to speculate about a form of telepathic anticipation of a cataclysmic event by a collective consciousness. By the way, I had a dream on the night before September 11th that included a plane and box cutters, but Madonna was dancing down the plane aisle, part of that dream, which I don't know what that means. Maybe it means that she was a symbol of American culture under attack. That said, remote viewing has been utilized by the Russian and American governments, basically using psychics to view military facilities, downed planes, and missing people. Researcher and psychic Stefan Schwartz used remote viewing with archaeology in mind and discovered Cleopatra's Palace in Alexandria, Mark Antony's Timonium, as well as sunken ships along the California coast. The concept of UFOs, now referred to as UAPs, is being discussed and addressed openly. In fact, in 2025, there was the third congressional hearing about this subject with both witnesses and whistleblowers, many military or ex-military, testifying under oath about unidentified aerial phenomena. Not speculation, no longer science fiction, but testimony. One of the great reveals of the most recent congressional hearing was a video from October 30th, 2024, of a MQ-9 drone shooting a Hellfire missile at a UFO or UAP, and the missile just bouncing off of it, which is unheard of, as three large orbs emerge from the UAP and fly away. I'll include a link to that footage in the notes. The subjects I just mentioned all pertain to much of what George was studying prior to his death, and that I had begun picking up on before even fully exploring this library. Is there a communication happening that fits within this paranormal realm? Does the fact that all the windows in this house were salvaged from the original Lockheed Martin Skunk Works factory influence my story, which was a highly secretive aerospace research and development division of Lockheed Martin, which built such revolutionary aircraft as the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the F-117 Nighthawk in that facility. And per one of the congressional hearings, Skunk Works housed not only a downed UAP craft, which they were expected to reverse engineer, but biologic material from the inhabitants of the said downed aircraft. What do I need here? Do I need someone to check if there's radiation coming off the windows, or do I need a psychic medium to tell me what's going on here? At the same time, artificial intelligence is advancing so rapidly that we're being forced to ask, what is consciousness? What is intelligence without a body? What is authorship? What survives us? Will AI be seen as one of our gods, our tools, or our messengers? And suddenly the questions that George surrounded himself with about religion, symbolism, hidden systems, architecture, synchronicity, and psychic phenomena don't feel eccentric. They feel kind of early. Was George preparing, or was he simply paying attention before the rest of us caught up? You know, I wonder, when future archaeologists study us, our servers, our algorithms, our abandoned devices, our smartwatches and rings that record our blood pressure, our phones and our iPads with thousands of pictures of food in restaurants, what would your artifacts say about you? Did George sense something approaching? Not an apocalypse, but a shift. And is that why this archive feels prophetic instead of nostalgic? Could this be a modern paranormal fairy tale? I say that playfully, but it fits. There's a magical beast in the form of a messenger falcon. There are treasures and riddles. There is loss and guidance and loneliness. There are signs pointing in every direction, including back toward myself. This episode asks you to imagine yourself as future ruins. What will your objects say when your voice is gone? Look out for episode 3, where I begin to explore George's library as a kind of map, one that points not backward, but forward. Because taken together, these books don't feel like a hobby. They feel like a hypothesis. The library begins to feel almost prophetic in nature, with titles such as The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, There Are No Accidents, Synchronicity in the Stories of Our Lives, a book about Russia's dark history, including its oligarchs, and The End of America by Naomi Wolf, Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot. Do you hear that sound? That's the sound of my clock telling me that this is the end of episode 2. Thank you for listening to I'm Curious About George. I encourage you to like, subscribe, comment, and review this podcast. Hey, it's free.